guys. How are you guys doing? Very good. Thanks for coming in so early. Well, you guys are in luck because today I'm going to show you guys a lot of really good techniques and tricks in ZBrush, right? But before we start off, I'm going to give you guys a really short presentation on myself. I'm a creature and character artist. I've been working for Blizzard for the past 7 years now, and I work in the cinematics department. These are some of the characters I've done over the years. And then before Blizzard, I spent a few years in Amsterdam working for Guerrilla Games on Killzone 2. But you know what? Today I'm not here to talk about that, right? I'm here to talk about creatures and monsters and things that really stuck with me as I was growing up. Stuff like Predator, Alien, Ultraman, Godzilla. These are the things that gave me a sense of fantasy and wonder, right? And creature design is very essential and it's very close to my heart. And that's why over the past years I've been focusing a lot on creating my own creatures and monsters. So I'm going to go through really quickly some of my work. Usually when I'm creating a creature, I look at several things, right? Sometimes I do a series of designs that are based on a certain IP. For instance, this is slightly catered towards Star Wars. You can see here the lightsabers. And then other times I just go into ZBrush and just freestyle. This was an example I did in a Massive Black workshop. And then after Pacific Rim, I definitely had to sculpt the kaiju, so this is my own take on a kaiju. More creature work, really inspired by the alien design, as you can see here. A lot of influence from the space jockey. So my workflow consists of starting out directly in ZBrush, right? Sometimes I do have a basic idea of what I want to do, and I sketch it on paper, and then I bring it into ZBrush and just start sculpting right away. But today's presentation, what I'm going to show you guys is actually creating the concept directly within ZBrush without having any kind of presumptions of what the design should be. And ZBrush is versatile like that because with all the features you get in ZBrush, it's really easy to generate random ideas. And then from then on, you finalize it, right? So I dabble a bit in rapid prototyping as well. This is a 3D print painted by a friend of mine. So this is another 3D printed model. And I like going beyond just a 2D realm, because whenever we render something out in 3D, it's just an image, right? So I really enjoy experimenting with rapid prototyping and resin kits and stuff like that. This is sculpted in ZBrush, rendered in Keyshot, and I was fortunate enough to try out the GoZ plugin back then, and this is just a testament of two programs coming together and doing something really great. And I'm really excited after hearing about what they did with the Keyshot ZBrush bridge thing. There's going to be a lot of exciting things coming ahead. So more creature designs, again inspired by Gigas, Alien, Xenomorph, Juicy Bug. It's another 3D print. And majority of my work is actually rendered in ZBrush. The way I work is I render several passes pardon me, I meant Keyshot. I render several passes in Keyshot, and then I comp them in Photoshop, right? So I don't really have to worry about UV unwrapping. I can just blend different parts out in Photoshop. And for this presentation, I want to keep it really casual. If you guys have any questions, just ask me. I'll be doing a live sculpt. And let's just keep it super casual, keep it live. I think that's the whole purpose of this demo, right? These are some of the brushes I use when I'm sculpting in ZBrush. And during the blockout stage, I don't really veer far from these brushes. The way I have these brushes set up is I have hotkeys assigned to every single one of them. so I can access them without worrying about accessing brushes, which brush do I use. Because during this stage of the process, I want to be really fast, and I want the process to be very fluid. So this is my UI. I have features that I use the most on top, right? I have my brushes here on the right, and you can see I have every single one of these hotkey, right? So we have our Dynamesh, and the first thing that I always do is just using the move tool and start pulling shapes around. I know for a fact that, for the sake of this demonstration, we would just want to do like a bust. Right? And using the trim dynamic brush, I'm able to create quick planes on my model. Sometimes it's important to just do this, because you can then break down your concept into simple planes. You can see I'm quickly accessing those brushes without having to go into this palette over here. And then we'll be working exclusively in Dynamesh. And some artists, they prefer to work at a higher resolution. I personally like to work at a very low resolution because it gives me a lot more control. I'm not concerned with the details, And I just like how fluid everything feels and how the model actually reacts to my brush strokes. So still have no idea what this is. This could end really badly. But you know what? We'll see. We'll see how this works out, right? So a couple of things you can do to quickly generate ideas. You can use insert multi-mesh brushes. There's a whole bunch of them here. You can select one of those and hit M. That lets you access the other meshes in that set. So this is the Dragon Bones multi-mesh set. You can see we have a bunch of bones. Let's check out this one over here. And then I'm just going to start, just dropping in shapes. Maybe one of these guys. And then using my Move topological brush, I'm able to just affect that object without affecting the rest, right? At the same time, if I use my default Move brush, I can start playing around with the overall shapes. Right now, still have no clue what this is, but I like that negative readout over here. It makes for an interesting silhouette. And then I'll just re-Dynamesh everything. It feels like this could be some kind of aquatic creature, like fins over there. And I'm constantly evaluating the silhouette, right? I'm not worried about details. I'm letting these shapes work for themselves. If something comes across as being interesting, I'll go ahead and pursue that. If it doesn't, just keep adding stuff. But this is an interesting workflow, right? Because it's similar to that technique by Scott Robertson, texture bombing. This I call it mesh bombing, because you're just dropping in meshes. You're not concerned about the final look. You're just playing around and see what could or could not work. And usually for this process, it starts out really nasty. Like half the time I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my God. But slowly but surely, once you start making conscious decisions on what to do, you'll be surprised with what you can achieve in ZBrush, right? And the cool thing about Dynamesh is I'm able to stay in this mode for such a long time, right? Some other things you can do is using the curve tube snap brush that lets us create forms like that, right? I can then blend that back in. And at this stage, it's probably a good idea to start figuring out, does this creature, does it have eyes? Is it going to have a mouth? What do you guys think this looks like? A bug? Yes. Okay, now you're making me hungry. I have been doing it all wrong. But yeah, definitely, I see a bug here, especially with those eyes. And we get to a point when we're starting to lose resolution, and that's when I up my Dynamesh resolution, so that I have more polygons to work with. I'm using the Damien standard brush a lot, and this is a great brush. This is like my bread and butter brush because it's great for laying down detail, and I'm not really committing myself to any of these design choices. It's just one of those things it's just like sketching, right? Might not work, but there's only one way to figure it out, and that's by trying. So let's use the curve tube snap again. I'm going to create a form along this line, and there are a couple of cool things you can do with the curve tube brush. One of that is accessing the curve modifiers and playing with the size. This graph actually controls the thickness of that curve along the surface of the model, right? So I can do interesting things like affecting this curve. I can make it thicker. Right? I can even do stuff like have it start out thin and then go thick. Right? And then I'm going to bake that down, and using my move brush, I'm going to nudge those forms back in again. So that actually kind of works. I guess that form that we just added is helping with the flow of this design. There are a lot of things that can help when designing a creature in ZBrush, right? Other than constantly having to evaluate the model, there are things like making sure your design is readable. And there's a tendency to just over-detail everything, right? There's a tendency, because ZBrush is that fast and powerful, there's a tendency to just go in and start adding every nook and cranny, creating wrinkles all over the creature. But when you do that, you could end up with a creature that's very noisy in terms of detail. And your eyes are not able to focus on certain areas. So that's something I try to take note of whenever I'm designing a creature. You want to have areas of rest as well as areas of detail. Now, where do you put detail then, right? If you look at this design, what's working? Probably these curves, right? And when I start adding detail, I'm going to do that along those lines, right? I'm going to keep a lot of these areas. I'm going to keep a lot of those areas relatively clean. I'm going to keep his forehead pretty clean and just focus on detailing these areas. And if you keep that in your mind as you're sculpting, you'll end up with a much more clean design. There's that nasty underbite. I'll show you guys real quick how to create teeth in just a bit. I'm not really feeling this lower piece here. All right, I almost feel like this entire design, it should just taper down like that, you know? So let's say I wanted to create a set of teeth over here, right? First thing we can do is make that cavity a lot more deeper. First thing I'm going to do is insert a cylinder like that. All right, I'm going to split it to a separate subtool. And then I can do stuff like, you know, using my clip curve brushes. Or using my clip circle. Or not. But I can just nudge this into place. And then again, I'm using Dynamesh, right? So we have something that looks like gums, I guess. I'm going to smooth that all down. Maybe nudge that in a little. And you can use X-ray mode, right? So this is going to let you adjust that subtool, and then being able to see where it ends. So let's say I'm happy with that. I can subdivide it once. I'm going to add these little holes, right? And this is where the teeth are going to come up from. You want some of that underlying structure to support the teeth. And we're doing this really quick and dirty, you know. Normally, you would want to spend a lot more time on this.
Hey, Dominic, we got a question on Twitter.
Yo.
So Ari is asking, how did you learn ZBrush? Did you use books, tutorials, school? What way did you learn ZBrush?
I actually stayed with Paul for like 3 months.
That's not good.
So if you guys want to learn ZBrush, just stalk Paul. How did I learn ZBrush? Was that a question?
Yeah. Or did you use books, tutorials? Did you go to school somewhere to learn it?
ZBrush Central, man. You know, just taking part with the community. And mostly by checking out the forums and the videos that the guys at Pixologic post. Yeah, I think there's so much resources out there. It's really easy to pick up the software. And again, you can also ask people that are already in the industry. There are a lot of really good artists out there. Yeah, so I guess I learned it the most from the community. Right?
So you just sat down every night and just started going at it and sculpting, and we're looking at the community and just going yourself, pretty much.
Myself, just hanging out with the guys on ZBrush Central, looking at really cool stuff. Yeah.
Is there a question out there anywhere? We can take one from the floor. Oh, we got a question from the floor.
Yes.
I'm getting mobile. iPad light on. Where was it? Here you go.
Sure. I just wanted to quickly ask, could you go over how to set up the toolbar where you have like your Dynamesh and your edit tool and like all the top part on the bar right below the menu? Because that's really cool setup.
All you have to do is go to, let me see, go to Preferences, Enable Customize, right? Once you do that, all your buttons can be dragged by holding onto Control and Alt, right? So once you have everything dragged to the right places, you just go back to Preferences, go to Enable Customize, and then go to Store Config and Save UI. So next time you launch, ZBrush is going to remember that that button is supposed to go there. Right? Okay, so let's create the teeth now. I'm going to use Insert Sphere. And I'm going to, make sure it has no subdivision levels. I'm going to turn off Dynamesh as well. I'm going to use Insert Sphere. And I'm dropping in spheres really quickly, like so. Right? And then I'm going to click on Split to Similar Parts. That is going to break out all those spheres into a separate subtool. And then using my snake hook brush, I can quickly, maybe I just want to turn off this guy. I can quickly just yank out forms like that, right? Maybe make them a little bit more tapered towards the end, you know, from the front, give them a little bit of curvature. So that's pretty much how you create teeth in ZBrush, or at least that's how I do it. There are a couple of other ways you can do it. One way is by creating a cylinder, and then let's say this was the cylinder I created, right? I can then use masking, right? I can, I can tighten my mask, and then I can extract that as a separate subtool, and then sculpt from there. So we have teeth now. And you know what? Another great thing about ZBrush is the ability to just quickly duplicate subtools, right? So, and then maybe I want this guy to be a little bit smaller. Yep. So that's how you create teeth. Let's move on to the rest of the head. And I'll talk a little bit about the brushes I use. I use clay build-up a lot to create forms. And then if I need to create a hard surface-looking form, I use the flatten brush, right? I use the Form Soft brush a lot, and I'll show you guys later in a bit what else you can do with the Form Soft brush. And again, the Trim Dynamic brush, I use that almost exclusively for creating wrinkles. So maybe there's some bug eyes. You can use a Damien standard brush, but instead of carving in, you can do the inverse, right? And because I'm still in Dynamesh mode, I can keep adding forms like that, right? Another cool thing about the curved tube brush is that you can add ridge lines really quickly. So by using that, I'm going to draw it along that ridge like that. Oops, I'm going to collapse that. Maybe make a bigger one that's going to reinforce some of these shapes. Same for this guy over here.
Got another Twitter question here for you. Brendan McGeary is asking, how old were you when you started using ZBrush? We're getting personal here at ZBrush Summit.
I know, this is awkward. You guys are going to know how old I am now.
I guess it's also...
And don't let this deceive you. I am way older than I look.
How about this? How long have you been using ZBrush?
Since version 2.5.
2.5.
Yeah.
So at least 8 years.
Jesus. Damn. Yep, so I'm going to Dynamesh all of that, and you'll see really quickly how I'm able to quickly create forms, right? And with very, very little effort. And again, at this stage, I want to start really cleaning up some of these forms. Anything that's really vague and not really clear, I want to go in and just tighten up the detail. I'm not too concerned about adding a lot of detail on the forehead, because areas like that, I want to keep it pretty clean. And then we can definitely work on the eyes here. Just make a nice cavity. That's where the eyes are going to be. And I'm going to use my insert sphere. I'm going to drop an eye in there. I'm going to drag so that it fits nicely, right? Or I can make him like super bug-eyed, like tennis ball eyes. And that always gets the audience for some reason. And then I'm going to split that sphere into a separate subtool, right? Again, running into resolution issues, and that's when I start to increase my resolution. I'm thinking what else I can show you guys here. I've covered curved tubes, insert multi-mesh, teeth. Oh, I can show you how to create spines, little spikes, right? Again, using the curved tube brush. I'm just figuring out where I should add it. Where do you think I should have spikes stick out from? Neck? Okay, let's do the neck. Before I do that, I'm going to try to hint on some kind of anatomy, I guess. And I can use my gravity brush. It's a standard brush with a gravity setting. And what it does is it's weighing down form. It's creating the illusion of weight and gravity, right? So I'm going to do that. So let's say we want one of those spikes to stick out here, and he's going to have a little friend here as well. Maybe another spike here. And that's going to help us echo part of that design flow to the neck. Right? I'm going to do the same thing I did with the teeth, and that's by creating a cavity like that, dynameshing it, right? And then I'm going to use the curved tube instead of the curved tube snap, because the curved tube is just going to let me freeform it. It's not going to snap on the surface. So we'll go to stroke, make sure our curve is suitable. And then I can just create spikes like that. And then use split to similar parts again. That's gonna help me separate those spikes. And I'm just gonna nudge them back in.
We got some more Twitter questions. You ready for another one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Nicholas would like to know, when do you say a sculpt is finished? So when's it done for you when you're sculpting?
You mean the entire sculpt, like all the way to final detail?
Yeah, just when do you consider, okay, that's a done sculpt, I'll move on to another one now?
Once I get past creating all the secondary forms and then working on micro detail like wrinkles and pores, that's when it's done, I guess. And then I will probably want to pose it as well. That should suffice for a creature bus concept. But even before getting to that stage, I actually spent a ton of time doing block out. And it was that process where I showed you guys I create these forms, right? I spent a huge amount of time doing that. And even when I'm at this stage, you know, I'm not afraid to mix changes, right? And let me just save this file real quick. Even at this stage, I'm not afraid to make changes. You know, you can just go on and start making global changes to the entire form. And you can do that using transpose master. I'm sorry, did that answer the question? I guess
Yes.
it did. Yeah, okay. I'm getting carried away here. But yeah, you can use T-pose mesh. That's going to bake all our subtools into one huge mesh, right? And I can still make overall changes to the silhouette of this guy.
And then again, for those here in the audience, if you have a question, raise your hand so I can get to you, get the microphone to you so everyone at live stream can hear as well. Here's another live stream question for you, Dominic. How long did it take you to get your first job in the industry after starting to learn ZBrush? This is from Ben.
Right when I graduated out of school, I had to do 3 years in the army. And then after that, I did a couple of jobs in commercials and indie games. Back then, nothing was really happening. And then I actually took a 1-year sabbatical because of all the stuff I was doing at work wasn't good enough to get a job at a AAA studio. Yeah, so what I did was I actually took a 1-year sabbatical and just went crazy every day, working full-time on my portfolio. And during that 1 year, I would say that was when I really spent time to create a decent portfolio. And let me see. Oh, actually what happened during that 1 year was World of Warcraft just got released. And I actually spent 6 months out of that 1 year playing WoW. So it's ironic that I actually got a job at Blizzard. But yeah, so I spent 6 months just working full-time on my portfolio. I created, I think, 3 or 4 models during that 6 months. All of them were fully textured. Yeah, so it took me about maybe 1 or 2 years, I guess.
Yeah. And now you're making everything for those other people now to play for 6 months straight.
Yep.
It's very ironic.
It is.
Here's another question for you. This one comes from Liquid Dens. What kind of resources do you use for learning animal anatomy for your creature designs?
Books, tons of books. And actually the internet is one of the best places, man. I would say sometimes the internet is better than getting a book because you'll be surprised what you can find, right? I mean, just use Google, even YouTube. It's just crazy the amount of reference you can get just off Google. So books and the internet. Next question.
Next question. Anyone from here before I move on more Twitter? Oh, we got one on the floor. Live on the floor. Here we go.
I noticed you had a lot of subtools. What was the tool that you used to transpose the entire model and change the silhouette real quick?
I use the transpose master.
Oh, okay.
And what you do is click on T-pose mesh. That's going to collapse all your subtools into one subtool, make your changes, and then click this button over here, which then splits it apart again.
All right, thanks.
Oh, we got another one right here.
Yes.
How much time do you spend per week just on your own personal work?
Almost all my free time. How much time do I spend on my personal work? Yeah, John would know because John actually teaches at Blizzard. I spent about anywhere between 2 to 3 hours a day, excluding weekends, and depending on whether the wife is okay with it. Because you do not want to anger the wife, man. You know.
She's in the audience, by the way.
Yeah, no, but honestly, the reason that I can do so much is because she's super supportive of what I do. She knows I love doing this, right? And it takes a lot of time because, you know, I spent 8 hours at work and then I got to go back home and do more stuff. And it's not as if I'm working, you know. I'm actually enjoying creating these designs because I own them. You know, these are my personal designs, you know. And that's a very different feeling from working for someone, you know, when you're doing your own personal art. Not that I don't enjoy my job. I do enjoy my job. It's just when you want total creative freedom, you just got to do it in your own free time.
Here, I'm going to give you a Twitter one because it's a perfect question for what we were just talking about, and then I'm going to hit the floor with another question. Aaron Coleman Hayes is asking, what are some things you do when you're not sculpting to keep your artistic and creative skills fresh?
I actually have a sketchbook that I sketch on. So whenever I get an idea, I actually see shapes in my mind, right? Shapes that could work out to be a cool creature. Whenever I get an idea like that, or when I look at something or somebody, and I think, oh, you know what? He could become a cool creature. You know, I would make a quick note in my sketchbook or draw little thumbnails and stuff like that. So I'm always doing that whenever I have my sketchbook with me. And then the other things is just watching movies. You know, occasionally I would play games. I also get really inspired by looking at other artists' art. Yeah.
So wait, you went from playing 6 months of WoW straight to occasionally playing games now?
Yeah.
We've got a question here on the floor for you.
Just professionally, how much time are you typically given to finish a sculpt?
It's one of those questions that's really hard to answer because it really depends on the character, right? But for AAA games, I would say a hero character would take anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks, everything included, texturing, UV unwrapping, sculpting, even working on shaders. For non-hero characters, probably at least 4 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And we're talking about AAA characters, so characters you would expect to see in like first-person shooters and like, you know, third-person games.
Here's another question from Twitter for you, from Jason Hunkin. Do you ever block in color with polypaint during the Dynamesh sculpt, or do you stick with purely sculpture
I stick
forms?
with purely sculpture forms. And it's rare. Well, occasionally I get an idea with color in mind first. And I'm trying to think of an example, especially when a design when a design requires a contrast in color, something that's really bold, for instance, a pale-looking creature that has very red elements on it. When I get ideas like that, then I might just quickly block in where I want the colors to be. But almost 99% of the time, I'm doing everything sculptural first. So I'm gonna hop ahead, right? So now that we have our secondary forms blocked out, you want to go out of Dynamesh. And then, because we have a very dense mesh now, you want to Z-remesh it. And the reason for doing that is you get a base mesh that is posable. You get a base mesh that is that you can UV unwrap with. And overall, it's just easier for you to work with subdivision levels, right? And even when you're sculpting, you want to have several subdivision levels so that you can drop down to the lowest, do overall changes to the form, and then step back up. It's just a different way of working. Some people actually stick in Dynamesh all the way to the end, and then Z-remesh, and then reproject. But for me, I like to, once I know that the design is locked down, I Z-remesh it, and then right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reproject the details back onto the Z-remeshed model. So I'm going to do that layer by layer. You'll see that every time I subdivide it, I'm reprojecting it, and slowly but surely we get something that is, bless you, that is similar to our Dynamesh model. So once we have that, you can see now I have proper topology to work with, right? If I were to pose this guy, it would be super easy, right? I can easily, right? Super easy to pose. And we're going to touch a bit on detailing this guy. So let's just focus on one part. Let's maybe work on the wrinkles here. So right now we have a lot more resolution to work with. And I'm going to wrinkle this a little bit more. I'm going to work on what I call are the hero wrinkles. So these are the most prominent wrinkles. I usually do this by hand. You can use an alpha map, but I find that being able to manually sculpt it gives me better results.
Brandy's back today on Twitter, and she's got a question. Have you ever worked in clay, or are you just strictly digital sculpting?
I'm strictly digital sculpting. And of course, I forgot to turn on symmetry. It's okay. With the undo history, it's super easy to just go back. Let's turn symmetry back on. I've tried clay a couple of times. It's funny, man. It's just not the same. You know, every time I see people sculpt with clay, I'm like, hey, that's just like sculpting in ZBrush, right? You know, all I have to do is use my hands. But man, this is just faster, you know?
Jason Fernandez would also like to know on Twitter how you develop a distinct style.
By looking at what inspires you and respecting that style, you know. For instance, I'm inspired by the alien design, Takayuki Takeya. I look at those designs and I let that inspire me. I don't try so hard to, I must come out with something unique that has never been seen before, because everything is a ripoff of something, right? And then the more you start doing art, your own art, the more you'll find things that you stray towards, right? And just follow that feeling, right? It's more of an evolution. You don't get it like overnight, right? So I look at what inspires me, and I go with it. You know, I do art I do a lot of alien-inspired art, and hopefully over time, my style will start to evolve. So for wrinkles, what I do is I use my Damien standard brush, and we can even subdivide it one more time. I use my Damien standard brush to make a cut, right? And then I'm going to use my gravity brush so that I weigh that down. Gives the illusion of skin flabs. And then I can use my form brush as well. And I'm going to show you guys in just a bit how I use the form brush. The really cool thing about the form brush is that it sort of retains overlying detail, right? And let me find a good...
We got a couple more questions here on the floor for you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. What software do you use to make your final topology for your last topology?
Yeah, depends. Probably with the next release of ZBrush, I hope I'll be able to just do it in ZBrush. But right now, if it's organic, I do a ZRemesh, right? And I use that as a basis because the topology is decent to work with, right? And if you're getting problems with like spirals and stuff like that, another thing you can do is cut off the model so that it terminates at certain areas, and then you can always just stitch that back in 3D Studio Max or Maya. The other thing you can do is when you're Z-remeshing, right, this button over here, instead of clicking it, you can hold Alt and then click it. That uses a different algorithm to calculate the Z-remeshing process. So I had to find out about that the hard way.
What, documentation?
Exactly. I was about to say, like, why isn't that on
Thomas, look, we've got another person that read it. Hey. That's 2 in the room. We got another question here on the floor for you.
So you said you work a lot in your free time. Do you do small projects like a sculpt a day, or do you work longer on bigger projects in your free time, or does it vary?
It really depends on what my mood is, I guess. You know, some days I feel like I want to work on a series of designs, like you saw the Star Wars inspired series. I did those in like, probably took about 8 hours, 8 to 12 hours each, and I did that over 2 weeks. And then when I get inspired, all of a sudden, I would just go ahead and follow that urge, right? And then other times, I feel the need to do something more complete, like a full creature. For instance, that kaiju creature that I made, that took a lot more longer. So I don't really have a fixed formula for that. You know, I do whatever inspires me. I'm not sure if you guys read that book, what was it, by Malcolm Gladwell? Blink? Yeah, Blink. It's about how you should always follow your intuition. So if I'm feeling really inspired about something, that's when you should do it. Because if you wait 1 day later, all that inspiration is going to be gone.
So there's a question here from Stuart Lynch on Twitter. As a character designer, do you spend any time making custom brushes, custom alphas, and etc.?
I spend some time. I don't spend a lot of time on it. Honestly, with the community, you don't really have to create anything now. You just go to ZBrush Central and just download something. But that's the great thing about ZBrush, right? It has such a huge community. So to answer that question, I don't really spend that much time creating my own custom stuff. Usually you can buy it from somewhere or you can get it from someone. And a lot of people are actually sharing stuff like that online.
Yeah, got another question here from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get through. Coming.
Hi, you mentioned that Star Wars was some of your inspiration, and I was just wondering, with a new Tron movie coming out in the near future, is there anything that you would be inspired to do for something like that type of style?
As of now, not really. And when I said I'm inspired by Star Wars, I really meant I was inspired by the space opera genre, right? But right now, I don't think there's anything that's really catching my eye. I'm really focusing on just creating a series of alien creatures, and majority of my stuff, you know, is all about alien creatures. So maybe, you know, whenever something comes out and if it's really inspiring, I will just follow that that lead and do something related to that, but as of now, there's nothing that's really inspiring to me.
There's another question here on the floor for you. Over your iPad Lite.
Hi. I noticed from the beginning of your presentation, you seem to have a couple creatures that seem like they were crustaceous or aquatic. And I was wondering if you drew a lot of inspiration or maybe favored creatures that live near like the bottom of the ocean where the light doesn't go.
Yeah, I love insects. I love insect anatomy. Yeah, definitely a lot of inspiration is drawn from creatures from the deep, insects. Actually, insects the most. There's this really cool book on Amazon. It's called 500 Insects, and it's this tiny little pocket book, and it's amazing. It has like tree hoppers. Those are the craziest things ever, man. They have this crazy extrusions up the top. So yeah, definitely inspired by insects. I'm gonna show you guys what I mean about using the form brush. So let's create a ridged surface. I'm using an alpha. I'm rotating my alpha. And then that's going to let me create an illusion that ridges. I'm just trying to figure out a good place to do it. Not working. Okay, maybe there. So let's say I have a ridge, a row of form like that, right? I want to be a little bit more harsh with it. Right? I can use my form soft brush, right? And I can go over it, right? And it actually keeps most of the overlying detail to a certain extent. I mean, if you were to, you lose all of that, right? But this is something that I like to do. I like to go in, it still maintains all of that detail. Maybe have another one that goes down here like that. And you can do this at other parts as well. I can do it here. I can maybe do that. And then I can use my form soft brush and just quickly go over it. And I do this a lot for biomechanical designs as well, right? So I have only 5 more minutes. So I've covered primary forms, block out, secondary forms. Maybe we can touch a bit on micro detailing, right? So at this stage, when you have your all your secondary forms done, you want to create a separate layer so that I keep all my alpha stamping on a separate layer. We can use some alphas, and let's see, these are the ones that come default with ZBrush. They're great. So I'm going to use that. And then you can use different stroke modes. There's spray, right? Or you can do it like that. It gives it a nice texture to it, right? And when I'm doing this, I want to bear in mind what forms are skin, what forms are bone. So I'm thinking maybe majority of this can definitely be skin, but it should transition to like a bone-like structure. So maybe all of that should be bony. And then if you want to do stuff like wrinkles, you create a separate layer. And then let's find a nice wrinkle map. And you can use the dots mode. That's going to let you, select it again.
You got another question way back here in the corner, live on the floor.
Yeah, do you use ZBrush or another software to create clothing and stuff for your other projects that you do?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Do you use ZBrush or another program to create the clothing and stuff we saw on some of your models that you had up earlier?
Do I use ZBrush to render?
No, ZBrush to make clothing.
Sometimes I do use ZBrush. For one of the pieces, I actually use Marvelous Designer. So it really depends, right? If I'm doing something that's really elaborate, that requires a lot of drapery, I might just go ahead and do it in Marvelous Designer. So let's use the drag rectangle. I want to be really subtle with this because it's really easy to go nuts with the design. And then once you have a stamp like that, right, you can just manually touch up using the Damon standard brush. You want some of that wrinkle to read more than the others, and then perhaps even go in with the gravity brush and start weighing some of that form down. Right? Doing it manually like this gives it an added realism. And then even if you go a little bit too harsh, you feel like it isn't working, you can always blend. Right? I can half the intensity. I can turn it back on and then work on it again. Right? So this layering system is how I create a micro detail. And what I usually do is I have a layer for each kind of detail. I have a layer for pores, I have a layer for wrinkles, I have a layer for like asymmetrical stuff. Like let's say he has a scar over here, right? I have a layer for that. Or maybe he has a huge pimple here, right? Because he's going through puberty, I guess. He's a young creature. And then once you're done with all the detail, you want to create another layer. And even with layers, you can step down, right? You can work on lower subdivision levels. You can step down and then start offsetting the symmetry, because that's the biggest giveaway when you're working with something digital, is that everything is symmetrical. So that's when you slowly nudge forms around. Maybe he's like that. And then maybe one eyelid is higher than the other. And it's even good to just grab like a big brush and just nudge everything. And because you have that on a separate layer, you don't have to worry about not being able to work on it again with symmetry. Because, I'll show you guys in just a bit. Because that's on a separate layer, I can turn that off, right? And I can keep working on this, and then I can turn it back on again, right? And then the last thing would be to pose it. Again, I do this on a separate layer. Save, make sure it saves. But yeah, posing is pretty straightforward, man. Just drop it down. But before you do that, you want to make sure that every subtool has a layer. And this is the annoying part, but it's going to take really quick.
We're going to take one more question here and then get Dominic in the back room. Here's your question from the floor.
When you're bringing your meshes or models into a game engine, how do you get around the UVs? Are you using PTEX?
Actually, for concept, if I needed UVs, I would just unwrap it in ZBrush using UV Master. And then I can rotate my UVs in UV Master as well. And then I'll just export it as a texture in ZBrush. And if you need like very specific UV layout, what you can do is just use UV Master. That gives you a good base to work with, and then bring all of that UVs over to a program like Max or Maya and just touch up the UVs over there. So let's say I'm happy with that pose. What? ZBrush Tool Master. It's the best program ever. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You guys can see, like, within 1 hour, I'm able to quickly concept a creature bus, right? It's not the most detailed creature, but if I were to bring this into a renderer, render it, do several passes on it, bring it to Photoshop, I can really make it something that's production worthy, has a concept.
Us guys, ladies and gentlemen, Dominic Qwek.